Generally, what is a job? Job is nothing but a collection of tasks and steps, right? That's what we have seen. Take any project. So what we have seen the agents and agent pools and what are the different types of hosted agents. Now, if you take any job for the pipelines, take a pipeline. This is our job, right? What are we executing inside the job? Is nothing but a tasks, right? This is our job, agent job one. So if you want, you can add an agent job. Another job also you can add. This is another agent job. So here you can define what this is job one, this is another job. Like this, you can add n number of jobs. So what is there inside a job? These are all, what is it called? Tasks, right? These are all tasks. What is there inside task? There will be steps. You click on any task, we are executing this step inside the task. So job is nothing but a collection of tasks and the steps. Right? How many types of pipelines we have? We have two types of pipelines, right? One is build pipeline, another one is release pipeline. So in build pipeline, you have two types of jobs, right? Agent jobs and agentless jobs. Similarly, you have another three types of jobs for release pipeline. Okay. Any doubts? Clear, right? What are the jobs? If you take release job, again you will find two types of jobs. Sorry, three types of jobs in the release pipelines. This is what do you say? Just show it in the document. To take any job, we have like this. So there will be a stage. Within that stage, you can have multi stages, right? We have single stage pipelines and multi-stage pipelines. So you have stage A. Within the stage A, you can have n number of jobs. Similarly, you can have stage B. Under that, you can have n number of jobs, right? So this is your, you can see here. Add an agent job, add a deployment group job, add an agentless job. What are these three types? Where this is what we are checking is release pipeline. If you go and check your build pipeline, you will have two types of jobs. There is no deployment group job over there, right? Add an agent job, add an agentless job. What is the difference? So these two will cover in release itself because both are same. So generally, a few things to run a few steps. We don't require any agent. Right? Agent is nothing but some hardware where some OS is running and you will execute your steps. Most of the time, where we'll use the agent jobs is like to execute a build related task or a test related task. We'll use agent jobs, right? What is an agentless job? Agentless job, right? There will get a task like you want to delay something. For that, agent is not required, right? The system level, the job level itself, you can manage the wait time, basically time out. Yeah, right. Like this, we can have another agentless job. We can consider like Azure functions. Do we really need an agent to run the Azure? Agentless job. We don't require, right? Azure functions are defined in our Azure portal. Those things will get validated in the Azure portal itself, right? And here we have two options: parallelism, none, and multi-configuration, right? We'll talk about this multi. What is the difference? Are you getting me?
Bhaskar, can you please speak louder? Some voice issue.
It's not okay. Is it better now? Okay. If you click on add, you will get the list of tasks which can be added to agentless job, like delay, the invoke Azure function, invoking REST APIs, any manual intervention, validations, publish to a service bus, Azure service bus, right? And query. For all these kind of tasks, actually we don't require any agent. So in case if your project requires any kind of these tasks, so blindly you can create a job which is agentless. Okay. Similarly, you can go for add a deployment group job. What is the deployment group job? If you remember, we have deployed our application into app service, right? So what is the deployment? If you take what is that? One pipeline, leave this. Edit. Publish artifacts, right? This is nothing but deploying your artifacts, whatever is generated as part of your CI pipeline to your respective target. It can be VM, it can be app service, anything, right? So this specific part is used under this. Where is that? When you create a release, basically, right? I will come back to here. No, sorry, I am the wrong page. Searching in build pipelines instead of release pipelines. So when you add a deployment job, you have multiple options here. So we'll talk about what are the different types of deployments also inside, but for timing, these are the three types of jobs we can create. One is agentless, another one is deployment job, another one is, what is the other one? Agent job, right? So what are the different options you have in the deployment? Let's say this is mainly for what do you say? Assume that you have a 10 VMs you need to deploy, right? So here you can specify how many, what is the percentage you want to deploy initially, right? Instead of deploying into the all the servers which are available, it's like deploying stage by stage. Let's say you want to, out of 100 VMs, you want to deploy only for the first 5. So you can specify that here. If it is multiple, that is one. If it is only one, then you have only one option here. Whereas if you have multiple targets, multiple deployment servers, you need to add these things. You can control basically over here, since we have only one deployment groups basically, right? So here you can create a deployment group. So once you add a deployment group, automatically, let's say, better I'll explain here. Assume that you have application you need to deploy into multiple servers. Let's say like this, you have n number of servers. These are all, you can add it for a deployment group. So what is the advantage? Instead of configuring for every agent, basically you can group all together. The let's say you have 100 targets here. So 100 targets, you can group it here. This will become your deployment group. Deployment group. Within this, you have your agent 1 like this. You have your agent 2. So what happens when you deploy from your artifacts? This is your artifact to here. Assume that you are going to specify a deployment group 1. This is deployment group 1, or you can say QA deployment group, right? When you want to deploy this particular objects to your QA group, so you can specify here out of 100, let's say I want to specify only we don't have any deployment group, so that once you select here, assume that you have a deployment groups, you can create your deployment groups based on your requirement, like QA you want or pre-production group. Generally, if you take, there will be n number of servers, right? It is not going to be one server where you are going to deploy. So definitely most of the time we will have parallel servers where you need to deploy into multiple servers. Let's say you take your Google or Amazon, they will have hundreds of servers, right? If they cannot deploy all in one shot, because if something goes wrong, all the users will get affected, right? That is the reason they will go partially, step by stage, or let's say 10% first, next 20%, next 30%, next 40%, like that. They will select that. Clear? And agent jobs, we know what is the agent job. We have already using it. We have already used it, right? So executing multiple, or it can be a build, it can be a testing, it can be a deployment part, anything. So those things will come under agent, where you need to execute few commands, right? So you have multiple stages. Within the stage, you have multiple jobs. You can create like this. Clear? Then there is something called life cycle, right? I'll come back to this, because if you talk about life cycle, then you can understand better. There are life cycle hooks. So what are the life cycle hooks? These 5 types, like pre-deployment, deployment, route the traffic, and post-route traffic, and on failure what happens, on success what happens. For these hooks, this is a sample script. What happens? Basically, you need to define your servers. We know what is the agent pool, right? So we'll call it as pools. Within the pool, you will define steps, what steps you need to execute, right? So once your definition is done for running all those things, then automatically route your traffic to those servers. So once the traffic is routed to the specific servers, there is something called post-route traffic. What is post-route traffic? This is nothing but a monitoring process. Once you deploy your application to a number of servers, these days, every project will have a monitoring concept. So what is the advantage of monitoring concept? You really don't know what is the load is going to come for your servers. So based on this, using these monitoring tools, basically you will have a better control, and it will send a signal or warning to the user, basically whoever is configured. So that way you will have a better control. It's kind of, rather than reactive, it is kind of proactive mode, right? If something happened, maybe your application crashes because of load or memory issues, rather than reacting for that, so alerts will be sent to you. Let's say you can define your thresholds, basically, right? Let's say if my memory reaches so and so percentage, then send immediately notification to the users, whoever is responsible for that. In that case, I will come to know in advance, okay, these particular servers are going to be affected with more memory or the less memory, then I need to take some action. So automatically I can take the corrective action for that instead of getting into a problem, right? Once that is done, on failure, you may have to do, on success, you may have to do 5 steps. Okay, this is the general format or for this. So what is lifecycle hooks? There is pre-deploy hooks used to run steps that initialize resources before application deployment starts. What does it mean? Let's say you need to deploy your application into a Linux server. Maybe it can be a CentOS or Ubuntu, you can say. But the deployment should happen for a container. Okay, let's say this is your agent. Within this, you need a container. You need a container here. Okay, now if you deploy from your artifacts or artifacts to your agent, what is the mandatory thing to run your application? You need your Docker. Container means Docker, right? So you should have your Docker service should be up and running before deploying these artifacts to your agent one. So in that case, you need to make sure that add a pre-deployment stage and add the required steps over there. In this case, we need to start all Docker services. Once the Docker services are up and running, then actually your deployment will start. What is the deployment? It will download the artifacts from your artifact directory and push it to the respective targets, agents, you can say. So that is deployment. Then routing traffic, once your application is running, then automatically you need to route the traffic to some application, right? Obviously the end user. So there, again, you need to use this route traffic hooks. We'll work on these hooks maybe in next coming sessions, future sessions. But for now, we try to understand this. Then post-route traffic, I already discussed. So monitoring, once your application is ready and ready to use, then monitor the application and send the proactive alerts for the user so that you can take a necessary action before getting into the problem. After this, you need to do few things on failure, on success. Maybe assume that whatever the deployment you have done here is not working as expected. In that case, what you should do? You should roll back your deployment to the previous version. In other way, if it is successful, why do you want to maintain? You need to do some cleanup. Maybe the previous versions, we'll talk about retention policy. There you can understand better what does the cleaning process, all those things, workspace cleanup and all, right? So basically on failure, some action, on success, some action you need to do. Is it clear? This is how you can write your pipelines using these hooks.
Bhaskar?
Yes.
Pre-deployment, resource allocation, resource utilize, like exit memory, like example, 100% is there. If it is exist of before prior intimation, right? Like 95% is getting the memory get increased. Okay, so then the prior intimation only will get, right, not like complete of 100%. So before
that's what I said. You
so
have to define at what stage you want. You will get the notifications. Maybe say for side, if your application is very critical, when it reaches 50 to 60% itself, send a notification. You can define all those things. It's all customizable.
Okay, so what percentage the resource is exit, like it is 160% is then we'll get increase. So we can do some hard-coded the percentage of
again, there is something called, when it comes to Kubernetes, auto scaling. Pods will be there, right?
Yeah.
So there is again different concepts. It all depends on what application you are using, what type of application, how what is the requirement or the type of or usage of your application, right? It all depends. You can customize it or if you are using Kubernetes cluster concepts and all, then maybe you can go ahead with the auto scaling, where automatically your pods will get increased. Auto scale up and auto scale down.
Okay.
We'll talk about that in later sessions. Yeah. For now, you have an option. Now, what I'm trying to say here is there are few monitoring tools which will help you in that way. One of the advantage of monitoring tool. There are many other advantages. Maybe when we are talking about the monitoring tools, we'll talk about that. Okay. Now, there are three types of deployments. Now we have seen what is a deployment, but there are three types of deployments. One is run once deployment, rolling deployment, and canary deployment. These are the three types of deployments. Run once, we have seen that already. So it's the simplest deployment strategy wherein all the lifecycle hooks, namely pre-deploy, deploy, whatever these hooks, whatever we talked about, right, executed once. Then based on that result, either it can be on success or on failure is executed, whatever you want. On success, what you want, on failure, what you want. So based on your requirement, you need to define that in your pipelines. So then this is straightforward. There is nothing much to discuss. What is rolling deployment? The rolling deployment is nothing but, we talked about this already. Let's say this is mainly for the virtual machines, right? We'll show here. Here, if you see here, how to write the max parallel number of percentage as X, right? So what does it mean? Let's say you have a 10 VMs. So when you are rolling it, roll it only for the 2 VMs, not more than that. So that way we can define your percentage, and based on that, the deployment can happen. Okay.
Yeah, Bhaskar, this rolling deployment is a part of Kubernetes also. In our organization, we are using this rolling deployment only.
Right, Kubernetes. Basically, you call it as canary deployment, right?
Yes,
Kubernetes mostly use canary because this rolling is applicable for VMs. The same concept, more or less, we'll call it as canary deployment, which is applied on the Kubernetes.
Yes.
Right. Here you will say, you can specify, let's say you have 100. So first deploy only for the 10, your 10 pods, basically here. You'll call it as pods, right? So first deploy things in 10 pods, or maybe then go to the second 20 pods. What is the advantage of this? In case of any issues, the impact will be only for the few deployments. The canary is actually a bird name. So earlier they used to use this canary for the, if you say mining, right? In minings, there will be some acids which will generate, right? So generally, this is very sensitive bird. So in case of any impact, this is the first bird which will die for those gases actually. So that's how the name came to this. So similarly here, the impact will be only for few in case of any issues, so that you can take the action and you can roll it further to 100%, whatever it is, right? So all the lifecycle hooks are supported, and lifecycle hooks jobs are created to run on each VM. So this VM level, you can control the number of percentage of virtual machines targets to deploy in parallel. That's what we discussed. You can define, you can control basically. If you are very confident that you have tested very well, you are sure that it is going to work, maybe go for 30% instead of 10% or 20%. So if you are not sure that whether it will go and work or not, so maybe go with the 10% first, check whether everything is working as expected, then roll out for other servers, right? So this is how you have to specify strategy, the rolling and max parallel number of percentage you need to specify here. This is how you need to write in our pipelines. So canary deployment, again, just now as discussed. So this is mainly for the Kubernetes. So this one is, I think it is, Kubernetes, yes. So you can roll out the changes to small subset of servers first. That's what we discussed. So as you gain more confidence in the new version, we can release it to the more servers, right? This way, the impact for the end user is very, very less, right? Canary deployment strategy supports the pre-deploy lifecycle hooks executed once and iterates with the, again, same thing. It is explained in detail. So the overall, that is the use of a canary deployment, and preferably these based on your target systems, you need to choose the respective deployment type, right? And what are the different types of jobs we have? Agent pool jobs, server jobs, container jobs. This again now, I'll show you here. So when you created a job, basically how to specify your syntax. Let's say you need to specify your pool where the agents will be there. Then you need to name that, whatever that name. Then based on the demands we have seen in the previous session, right? What is demand? You can define your rules. Once you define your rules, then if the demand is matching out of your pool, only in those agents you go and deploy your, what do you say, artifacts, right? You have seen the demands, right? If you remember, when you go to your organization settings, agent pool, agent pools, agents, click on agents, capabilities. Somewhere we have defined it right here. I don't know which job, but whether it is. Basically, you'll define your capabilities here. Somewhere we defined, I forgot. Okay, not an issue. Go to agents. Basically, you will define your capabilities here. Add a new capability. So if this is matching, then automatically you can. So this is how you can define your agent OS equals to Windows, then something, whatever, right? Then server jobs. So basically, this is kind of agentless jobs, which we have already discussed few things like maybe running the Azure functions or something like that. So basically, you need to specify that this way: jobs, job name, then the pool name, whatever it is. This is important, where most of the time we will be using container jobs, right? Most of the deployments will use this actually, container jobs. What is container? Container is just, you will create a container. How to create a container? If you have an idea of Dockers, so within the Docker, you can create your containers, right? You can create your container. So how to specify? So within the pool, it's a VM image is Ubuntu. Within that Linux server, if you want to run your what do you say, a container in Nginx, right? You can specify like this: take a image, Ubuntu or latest version or whatever the version, then within that run my container, which is Nginx, or maybe Jenkins, or maybe anything, any container, whichever is required for your application. So within that, you need to write your steps and execute the scripts, whatever you want within that. Clear? Basically, what is this? You create your Ubuntu agent. Within that, you can run your containers. On Linux and Windows agents, jobs may be run on the host or in a container, right? So based on your requirement, you can run your application. If the demand is to run on the container, you will run it in container. If it is on host, directly you will run it on host. Containers provide isolation from the host and allow you to pin specific version of tools and dependencies, right? You can select the exact version of operating system here, 16.0 or 18.0 or 20.0, whichever you want. Whereas if it is Windows, again, you can specify the version, right? You have a flexibility of hosting into the respective system. Maybe you can pass this as a parameter in your ML, pass this as a parameter. Automatically, it will take the respective version while executing job. Maybe when you are running the job itself, you can select this and give the version whichever you want, right? So based on that, it will go and deploy into the respective version. It is like on the fly, it will download the requirements, what is required for that based on your prerequisites, and it will do that. Again, like job dependencies, like whether it is whether you want to do the debug job or release job. So you need to specify in case of any dependencies is there, right? What does it mean? Let's say if you don't specify this depends on debug, what it will do, the jobs whatever you have specified will go and run in parallel, right? But if you specify depends on debug, it will wait for the completion of this job, basically to link the jobs, right? So you have some dependency on your debug objects. Once debug objects are generated, maybe you will do some unit testing. Then if it is okay to proceed further, then only go and initiate my release job. So in that case, the first thing you need to specify is depends on debug. So it will wait for the results or conditions, whatever you have specified here, right? Whereas sometimes you may have to do in parallel, right? Let's say your application actually has to run on different environments or operating systems where there is no dependency at all. Let's say whatever is required for Windows is not required for Mac OS, or whatever is required for Mac OS is really not required for Linux. In this case, you really not required a dependency, right? So automatically you can run these jobs in parallel and save the time instead of doing it in sequential. So if based on your project demands, you can define dependency. Clear? Any doubts? So most of the time this is required actually because the linking jobs is very, very important. So generally the pipelines are linked. So most of the time the dependency will be there for the previous job. Whereas only the special few cases like this here, you really don't have the dependency on the other jobs. In case if you don't have any dependency, you can go ahead with the parallel execution. In case you have any dependency, you can specify the dependency on whatever the job you have. Clear? Now workspace. Generally, when you run your job, right? To go and check here, where is our pipelines? Okay. So if you go to your pipelines, this. If you see here, every run has its own artifacts, right? So you need some space to store this, right? If you say you want to deploy this specific thing, go to here, you have your artifacts, you have your logs, everything is there, right? You go here, your artifacts are there specific to this specific run. Similarly, for every run, you have artifacts, right? So where are they storing? They need some space, right? So that space is nothing but workspace. So by default, how to manage the workspace? There are few parameters like when you run an agent pool job, it creates a workspace on the agent. The workspace is a directory, nothing, just a placeholder to store your all these things, right? So there are few parameters where the workspace will have, like build.source directory is the place where all your task related source code, whatever it is, or your source code will be there in your source directory. And artifacts, all your artifacts will be saved in the artifacts. And binaries, all your binaries will be there in this binaries directory. And test results directory again, because these are all important, right? You need to store these things. Why do you need? Audits are very, very important, right? You will have audits. And in case if your artifacts, if you want to redeploy, you assume that if it is a small build, it is okay. Assume your build takes longer time, but you want to redeploy. So you should maintain your work directory at least few releases, right? So we will talk about retention policy, where how to what do you say, restore or the hold the artifacts, retain the artifacts basically for so and so releases or so and so dates. We'll talk about that. So, but what is workspace? Generally, whatever is generating as part of your process, those things will get saved in a directory for every run. So we really no need to maintain all these things, right? So, and this is important. When you run a pipeline on a self-hosted, by default, none of the subdirectories are cleaned. So we'll talk about the cleanup policy also in between two consecutive runs. Whereas in your Microsoft hosted pipelines agent, basically, so you have an option of cleaning between two consecutive runs. Okay. So how to specify that in case if it is self-hosted VM, because by default nothing will happen. So how to overcome that? By specifying this like this clean option. Job, my job, whatever it is, the workspace, clean, outputs, resource, all. These are the three options you have to specify. What does outputs? Outputs, if you specify clean : outputs, this will delete build binaries directories before running a new job. The binaries are really not required, right? Because it will regenerate it. So if you specify resources, it will delete all source directory before running a new job. If you specify all, it will delete. But out of this, there are two things which will automatically deleted irrespective of whatever you specify. It is artifact directory and test result directory are always deleted and recreated prior to every build, regardless of any of these options. Okay, these two by default it will be deleted. In case if you want to delete others, in the case of self-hosted agents, you need to specify clean option followed by these values, whatever it is based on your requirement. Clear? It is clear. We'll talk about retention policies. Okay. What is retention policy? See, if we see here, there is your organization settings. Right. Go to your organization. You have a limited space. Go to your billing. You have only 2 GB space. So if you keep on running your jobs, right, how will you manage your space? And do we really require to maintain all the history or the job related stuff?
Really not required, but yeah.
Right. There are different use cases. Let's say internal releases, external releases, your developer does few things, but for everything, your stuff is getting stored over there, right? So you can come up, if it is an internal release, you no need to maintain too many copies. If it is a production release, or maybe you have to maintain all the copies, right? So maybe if it is developer build, you no need to maintain. Maybe within a week or once it is delivered to your next stage, automatically delete it. So basically, you have your retention policies where you need to specify that. Here is your old take pipelines release. We are getting this release 1, release 2, release 3, all these things. How are we getting these options? Release 1, release 2, release 3. We have not specified anything, right? So assume that you want a different name for this one, release 1, or maybe your project name followed by release 1, because you will be handling a number of projects, right? So in that case, here, this is the controller to display whatever you want over there. If you rename, or if you want to customize, you come and modify here. So automatically that will be reflected in your release things. Okay. So here, this is what I want to talk. But before that, I just want to show that where you can rename your different things. So basically, you have your release 1, release 2, release 3, so many things, right? But you really required all those things to be maintained for a long duration. Maybe this has failed. There is no point in keeping this. I'm just giving. You can think of your cases where you want to retain these things. So in this case, you can always define a retention policies for how many days you want to keep, or how many releases you want to keep, retain basically, right? Like this, you can define your retention policies. We click here, release 1. So earlier session we were talking about, right? In case if you want to redeploy here, you can come back to this, assume that these are your releases. This release is not okay. I want to roll back to my release 5. Click on this. We have an option to redeploy here. Okay. So automatically it will roll back to this specific version. And another advantage here, since I have edited this, you have an edit option here. Assume that you want to do some customization for the released versions. Let's say you want to do some customization for release 4. I'll always click on that release and click on edit release, and modify whatever you want. This will be applicable only for this release. It will not inherit or apply for other releases. Okay, this option also is there. So ultimately, the retention, and why I'm talking about these options now, the retention policies you can define. Here, you can see here, days to retain a release, 30 days. Clear? Set the number of days to retain a release deployed to this stage. Any release can be retained for at least 1 day and maximum of 365 days. That's all, 365 days. You cannot, this MS will not support more than 365 days. Okay. And minimum releases to keep. We have n number of releases now. So if you want to retain only 3, you can define here. Clear? This can be done at organization level or the project level. You can define this at org level also. Again, just now we were talking about, right? There will be different use cases. You have your development where developer does n number of tests every day, but you don't want to retain so many things for that. So you just minimize that. Whereas QA, maybe you have to define a separate set of rules for QA. So you can define a separate set of, maybe here you want to maintain 5 instead of 3. So you can define that. Whereas in production, you want to define, maybe you want to define 6 months, right? 180 days. But whereas you want to keep at least 6, since it is production, right? So at stage level, basically, you can define your retention policies. Clear? If you go to your organization, you can define in org level also. There is some option. I think here. No. Where is the retention policy? Okay, I think they have moved from this to individual. Earlier, it was a link actually which was provided here. Okay, attention project level. Okay, well, I'll show you maybe. So, build and release retention policies. Build pipelines. When you run, actually, it will create a release. Or maybe if it is release pipeline, release. If it is build pipeline, build. Even if for AML, you can specify like this. Retention policies are used to configure how long runs and releases are to be retained by the system. What is the reason for this? The primary reason to delete older runs and release or to basically it is cost. It is directly linked to your cost, right? If you keep on maintaining your all the artifacts, logs, everything, then you will end up buying more space, which is really not required. Now tell me one thing, question to all of you. Assume that you don't have any backups, right? Is there a way to retain? Tell me any option. Assume that everything you have made it 0, 0. You are not retaining anything. But I want to go back to the previous one. Can anyone tell me one option? How can we revert back to that or retain something if you want? Let's say you have your application running, which is not working with the latest one. For some reason, you don't have your backups.
Bhaskar, we can run our previous pipelines, right?
Exactly. So that's where the version control is very, very useful. Okay. Worst case, for some reason, if you don't have the backup version where you want to put it back, go to that specific version of revision, trigger your pipeline for that specific version. Maybe it will take some time, but ultimately you have a solution, right? So you can use that option as well. Clear? Any doubts in this? Okay. Any doubts? Go to this project. It was at job level, you can specify somewhere we have here. Sort of retention policy at project level also you can set. Within that project, you may have, maybe you want to define your global retention policies for entire that group. You can define here. Days to keep, artifacts, symbols, whatever. Same thing. Days to keep runs, days to keep pull request runs. Maybe based on your requirement, you may have to reduce and increase these things, right? Here you can play around with this. Let's say days to keep runs is 30, but if you try to do 31, it will not allow, right?
Bhaskar, I have one doubt here.
Yes.
If we specify the retention policy settings at the organization level, okay, and the project level, does this like depend on each other? Like inheritance is in place?
Always the preference goes to the child. Let's say global and local.
Okay.
You have your global and local, which will have more priority.
Obviously,
right?
child only. Yeah, local only. Yeah.
Local. So same here also. Okay, got it. So always you can overwrite locally at a project level in case you have defined at org level. Again, if you have defined something on project level, again you have an option to control at the stage level, whether it is deployment stage or QA stage or whatever it is.
Got it.
Right. So how to define is the same thing, whatever we discussed, run retention policies. So range, I just given few examples here, artifact symbols, whatever it is, and how to, same thing, whatever it is. Yeah.
Bhaskar?
Yes.
Yeah, basically, we use the retention policy where the can you explain once again?
See, why do you want a retention policy? Assume that every day you have releases, right? So the generally what happens, there will be internal releases and there will be external releases. The internal releases will happen n number of times, right? If you have enabled your CI/CD, right? For every commit, there will be a run, right?
Yeah.
Which may not require to retain that, right? But because you have enabled your CI/CD, it will go and run every time for every commit. But ultimately, end of the day, you will tag it as something. So only if you retain that specific tag, that is more than enough. You don't need to retain every run artifacts or the logs, everything for every developer. Correct? Since you have enabled, it will be 1,000 runs per day. Example, you have 100 developers or 200 developers, right? Assume that everyone has done the commits. So obviously your runs will be too many, right? What is the use of maintaining all those things? It is really not required. If you are doing really a release, then it makes sense.
Correct.
So in that case, you can define your retention policies, go to your maybe a specific app level, right? Go to your pipelines. Maybe you want to define your retention policy here. For deployment, don't keep at all. Just change it. Okay, here, go to retention, select the development, basically, sorry, development, and just make it only 1 day or 2 days. You don't want to maintain that. Why do you want? The space waste, right? Honestly. Is it clear, Anand?
Yeah, so I mean, so taking
basically the backup policy, whatever is backup you want to backup, how many backups you want, the previous releases or the previous deployments, previous logs. So generally a good practice to maintain clear of your logs. That's where the workspace will be saved. Otherwise you need to pay more because you will take more. Obviously if you go, for our example, our subscription, similarly even your production will have some limit, right? Maybe 100 GB, you need to pay some amount. If it is crossing more than 100 GB, you need to pay more amount. Why do you want to pay for unnecessary things?
Yeah. Just to clear the like any
delete, remove unwanted things.
Remove unwanted
clean up, basically. Yeah, cleaning up.
Okay, clean. Okay, housekeeping kind of data where you need to delete and
right. So next we'll talk about variables, how to define variables, and we will run through with whatever topics we discussed, maybe 1 or 2. Right, variables and secure files, basically key files, how to add. Then yeah, how to manage the resources and permissions, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in next session. Okay then. Thank you.
Thank you.